get started, I have a little interactive survey online that we're gonna do together, kind of just starting to brainstorm, and then after that we're gonna have an open discussion. So there are two ways to join this meeting, and I'm going to have it in the chat box, and I'm also going to share the screen with you so that you can see it. Right, anyone else not answered yet? Okay, so I'm gonna close this. So thank you very much for sharing your experience.
Matt, are you going to be saving these responses? Because some of them I'd like to be able to see again.
The session is being recorded with all the responses.
Ah, true. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and I have access to them later. So I'm going to stop sharing. All right, so a couple of comments before we have a discussion. One is this platform, if you haven't seen it, the pooleverywhere.com is one way of animating and making the sessions interactive, especially for icebreakers, as one of you noted. So that's a tool that can be used jointly with Zoom. It has some advantage over the Zoom's poll in the sense that you can have open-ended answers, and also it's anonymous, and it's good to tell the students beforehand that this is anonymous. Another thing is it's good to take note of the problems that happen. So a couple of us ran into problems trying to access this, and just to notice how frustrating that can be. You know, you feel like pressed, and this is what students face. So so when we go through it ourselves, it helps to just pause for a moment and realize that how frustrating it can be for students when they go through it, and they probably have been less experienced. So that's also part of the game. And also the answers that you gave, to basically, that's part of our experience, both the positive and the negative, trying to incorporate all of that and digest all of that. That's I tell my students that if you had a negative experience, you don't need to repress it or be so bitter about it. Just be with it, just feel it. That's also part of your learning process. Anyway, so either on those questions that we just did a reflection, or on any other comments, any other elements of your experience, we're going to open up, make any comments about your experience.
I actually, here, let me just open my video here. I actually asked my students, I was looking for some feedback from my students. I just wanted to ask them what it was like for them this semester. And maybe you guys have heard similar things from your students, but a lot of them found it was very challenging. It was hard to manage their time. They had a lot of videos to watch. There would be a backlog of videos, you know, like pre-lecture videos. And then during the synchronous times, if they had troubles keeping up, then they would have to follow up with watching the recorded video of the synchronous time. So it'd be 2 videos per class. And so they would end up with a backlog of videos to watch. And so that they found that really challenging. They missed interaction with each other. I think that's something that we have to think about for the fall, and that we need to give them a way so that they can talk with each other online or through some sort of platform. But I think that interaction with each other, with the students, between each other, is going to be really important, especially for the incoming students. So these are some of the, like, even the strongest students I had were having difficulties keeping up and staying motivated and doing the practice problems. And so just wanted to share.
Yes, Lee, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I survey my first year students in a studio class, and I have them for 6 hours. So it's a long day, usually together. And their biggest challenge that went after the survey, I asked them a lot of questions about their growth and so on, but in this term in particular, I directed it towards the transition a little bit, and they found it very difficult to be motivated, but I found that they did acknowledge that changed over the course of time when they realized it was on them. And so some of them stuck around. I lost a couple, but the majority stayed, and I think their growth was profoundly different than it has been in other years. The minute they realized it's up to me, I want to do this, I gotta find out how to get through it. It's pretty, that's different for most first year classes that I've had who depend on me to be there in front of them, you know, pushing them along a little bit. So definitely that was noticed with my students. And second year also, they really realized this is up to me. I'm gonna have to do this. I'm gonna have to figure it out. It's not up to her this time. So I've enjoyed seeing that happen.
Chris Whitaker.
Yeah, I was going to say on that topic of getting feedback from students, Selma and I had a meeting with OAD this morning, and this week we should be getting a report of the survey that was given to students in May, asking for their feedback. They said they had thousands of replies by students, and they said the students didn't hold back. So what's nice is we will get a sense of, because it's difficult hearing from a couple of students, so there'll be a more systematic set of data coming your way soon. And in that conversation with Catherine and the OAD folks, Catherine Labelle, we set up some meetings next week that will happen on the hub to allow teachers, to give teachers a chance to process the data results together, to talk about the data results, to sort of do a group think. So just so you know, that stuff's coming. In terms of student feedback, you'll be getting a ton.
Thank you. I would like to share with you one experience, one observation that I had, especially from teachers in the meetings that we've had through multiple channels. I noticed that a lot of the frustration, a lot of the negative opinion that comes from the Zoom sessions, the experience with Zoom, speaking to a screen of names where there isn't that human element, when there isn't that interaction. Which makes sense. I mean, the whole juice, the whole spirit of the classroom experience is taken out of it. So I was wondering that maybe for those teachers who've had that kind of frustrating experience, perhaps they could be encouraged or introduced into maybe more asynchronous methods or ways of making the actual Zoom session more interactive. So I don't know, what was your experience with that? If you ever felt discouraged, maybe speaking to a screen. One friend said it's kind of like shouting into the void. Anyway, Chris, rather.
Yeah, that was my primary problem with shifting to this, was that having taught in the active learning classrooms, or even just doing a regular lecture, I was able to take a look at the class and very quickly just immediately see from expressions and activity what I needed to change. If I was doing something too fast or too slow, if I missed a step, or I could see a quizzical look, I could know that they wanted to ask a question, but they weren't brave enough to bring it. All those nuances were completely lost. And during a Zoom session, if I would regularly pause, right? Because I do what I usually do on board work. I'd pause, turn it around to them, and there'd be deafening silence. And it was a matter of just resolve of like, okay, I'm not going to speak. I'm not going to say anything to myself for 2 minutes. I just let the silence draw out, and then eventually it'd be like one of the same 5 people would ask a question. It's just, it crushed my spirit a little bit, but I hope that's something that I can figure out how to turn around, because in the fall I'm going to be teaching first semester students, and I have to find some way to hook them into the dynamic, the interaction of, you know, I'm here to answer questions and I know you have them. Please just say something. I don't know if I can, like, I don't know, is it ethical to offer grade points for asking questions? I'm tempted. Don't say that. Shit, this is recording. Okay, you know what I'm saying.
I would
joking, not joking.
I would like to. One of
Kathy,
my
we are going to come back. Let's go Vince, Natalie, then Kathy.
Yeah.
By the way, you can raise your hand, and I'm keeping a speakers list. Vince, go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of agree with both Chris and the other Chris. Interaction, and Carmen as well. Interaction is necessary. The students were shy. When I would host one of these hosted Zoom synchronous meetings once a week, no one would come on board and engage with their video cameras. They were always off. They were introverted students, as Ahmad would refer to, rather than extroverted. So how do we get them to reverse that thinking and open up? They have so many things on their mind. Lack of sleep is one of them. But how do we get them to engage? And I was thinking of one really effective way, which I applied and it worked for me. These asynchronous versus synchronous surveys, they have to be online and instantaneous. Moodle's got a great feature. One of their activities is called the poll survey activity. And I use that to monitor my progress with the students. I said, listen, if you don't like the way I'm teaching a particular subject, let me know right away. And I had to make sure that they were anonymous, because if they were not anonymous, I would get more responses with non-anonymous surveys than anonymous. So the truth would come out with non-anonymous surveys rather than anonymous, where there would be 20 responses and they would put the first thing that would come on their minds, irregardless whether it was anonymous or non-anonymous. I was able to adjust and recalibrate my method of delivery based upon their answers. I didn't wait for teacher evaluations at the end of the term. I wanted instantaneous results so I could adapt and adjust. That's what I found interesting with this reflective writing. Make sure that it's their own thoughts and not a copy and paste approach from the internet. That's all I have to add.
Thank you, Vince. Natalie, go ahead.
Oh, okay, now I'm talking. Now I found with the screen sharing, when I would make it multiple so that students could share their screens with their images and what they would like to do, that it worked, to get a better dialogue going. And also when we would do critiques, I would ask people to submit work a little bit earlier, and I'd make PowerPoints of all the students' work and we look at them collectively. And that kind of worked quite well to do it that way. And yes, it was more work, to collect everyone's work and put it all in the PowerPoint. But that was a really nice, group effort that we would have really good discussions for at least an hour and a half, like, out of half the semester or whatever. That was good. Like, at least I knew they got the point and they got to show their work. So those things worked about Zoom and doing the screen share, giving it over to the students to do. And actually one student in a class actually created a Zoom meeting just to talk to me. It was very cute, to show me their work. So
that's wonderful. Yeah. So basically giving them responsibility and also having some pre-class work to do. Kathy, you had something to say?
My students did come online, but we had very small groups. I was like Robin, creating a clinical simulation, and I don't know if I think that all of our groups probably were, they're showing their faces, at least most of the time. But, and I don't know if it's because it was a clinical course, so they felt they sort of had to be there. We had a clinical evaluation, but one student actually did say to me, that, and I thanked her for participating. She was one of those 5, like Chris said, that participated a lot. And she said, and I said, thank you for participating, and leading the discussion sometimes. And she said, well, sometimes I would just feel sorry for you, just sitting there waiting for an answer. And so I realized that sometimes if you do wait, they will, and they do have empathy, and they do realize that it's awkward on both sides. But my biggest success with getting them to participate was through the chat and through on-screen written collaboration, in either using Zoom. I used Google collaborative docs simultaneously with Zoom a lot, but either way it worked, and using the chat, but getting them to participate by typing, and then they could all sort of be participating was more efficient because they were participating at the same time and the answers were coming in and they're seeing each other's work. And I also did a little bit of what Natalie did, was asking them for stuff beforehand and sort of picking out some answers, and then we would have a discussion around what they said, like the, you know, 5 different people came up with these 5 different plans. What's the most appropriate? Which one would you put on top and why? And it would sort of, if I built the discussions around their work, it made it a lot easier. Or asked them to present their plan, and they knew that they had, you know, they would each present a plan during the class, and they took over the screen and discussed and group feedback. And those are the things that work the best than me trying to bring content that I made on my own. So just throwing out a couple things that did work, but you know, I think we all had a lot of the same frustrations.
Thank you. So Kathy's integrating G Suite, Google Docs with Zoom is a very ingenious way of getting these students to participate. By the way, as I said, I'm keeping a speakers list, so we're coming through the order. So Riza and then Maureen.
Yeah, I'm just curious because I'm hearing, you know, there's a lot of people talking about the challenges of getting students' class cameras on. So I'm just curious, like a raise of hands here, how many people found that challenging, like to get students to turn or the majority of your class to turn the cameras on? Yeah. So that's interesting. Some people do, some people don't. And for my classes, I found some classes were better than others. But I'm wondering, and I'm not sure on the ethics of this, but can we make it sort of mandatory? I understand some kids don't have the bandwidth, and that's really an issue to see who's got like inadequate internet at home. And that's going to be something we're going to have to deal with. But I'm thinking when I sort of really kind of cajoled them into turning on their cameras, because I was very honest with them. I'm like, you know, it's really kind of awkward being up here looking at a bunch of black boxes. I mean, could you guys, you know, please put on your cameras? And then they started to. And when we had conversations, when we got more into discussions, more and more they did. And then you began to build a sense of classroom. Like, so that, I think it's pretty essential. And I don't know about other people, but we do give participation marks. And so I think if we're going into online next semester, I'm going to consider camera on part of participation marks. And I'm not sure, like, you know, how that falls into our ISEP policies and things like that. I think we probably need some new categories for that. But yeah, virtual backgrounds, I worked with those also. And I think I'm going to get more creative with that, you know, with themes, a theme of the week, you know, and get them to look up fun or interesting, especially in film courses, right? We can have genres. Okay, next week is horror and the week after is Westerns, you know, so we can have fun with that. But again, not all students have computers that run the virtual backgrounds. You need some pretty advanced machines. Like this PC that I'm on right now does not run virtual backgrounds. That's my, my real life background. But we can have fun with that as well. So I think thinking about ways, especially for those first years, to engage them. Also for the breakout rooms, and here's another question. They can share their screen amongst their groups if I allow that in the settings, right? In the breakout groups, and then they can present their shared screen back to the bigger group. Can we go away, have them work on a problem, come back, and then share their shared screen? Or the easier way maybe to do that is on a Google Doc, which we use a lot. So just trying to figure out how to integrate all of these different technologies to make smooth sessions. It's a lot to sort of work through. But yeah, that's what I'm looking at for the fall.
Thank you. Maureen.
I'll just continue on what you said, Reza. So using the breakout rooms, and I did use breakout rooms quite a bit. So one of my classes had about 20, 21 students in it. But as Chris said, you know, usually when they're out doing, you know, they have a task and they're doing that in a breakout room, you can see them in class and kind of see who's struggling and who's on topic. And somebody mentioned that. But it was really clunky going in and out of the break rooms. So it worked well, and they had, you know, they were able to, you know, work in small groups and come back and somebody would present. So that really helped with participation. But yeah, it was really tough to go, because usually I like to be able to go in and give some input into each of the groups, and it just, you know, a couple times I went in and they're talking about something else and judging time and things like that. So if there were another option for breakout rooms, or that, you know, I don't know if anybody ever hears of some before next semester, that'd be great.
Okay, Lee, then Francis.
Yeah, I really feel what Chris Roderick was saying about not seeing the faces and not feeling present with them and the reactions, and seeing that they understand what I'm talking about when I'm doing some heavy content. One thing I did warn them about a couple of times, and it worked quite well, is that I warned them that I would ask them to submit their handwritten notes at the end of the lecture, and I used Moodle to just collect notes from them, and I was, not sure what they were getting, what they were comprehending. Wow, the notes were amazing. I really was gratified to learn that they listened quite carefully. And I said it has to be handwritten, can't be typed, because they could share, right? So yeah, so I saw the personal touch in their handwriting. That made me feel a little bit better.
Thank you, Francis.
Yeah, I was just going to speak a little bit too to the challenge of trying to see actual faces on the screen. I think a lot of that for me, I just found myself being patient, waiting 10 minutes, getting people to talk about unclass related stuff, because my students had individual challenges and turbulent households and lots of stressful stuff going on. So just sort of calling them out one by one in the names in the black box, eventually they just sort of found their comfort level. Not all of them, of course, but some did, to realize, like, half of them, not many of them, are just on their phone still in bed. I'm seeing them in the morning and they just don't want to share that. Or many of them are in a closet because that's the only space that they have and they're embarrassed about that, and they can't blur their screen or give a virtual background. And just sort of trying to be sensitive to the fact that, like, don't forget that we all know each other from a good part of the semester, and no one's really judging anybody if you're wearing a tattered t-shirt or you're still in bed or you have to be in, like, your kid's sister's closet to be able to go to school. Or they're embarrassed that they don't have a webcam when some of their friends have, like, super advanced tech setups and they don't. So I found myself always just not holding myself accountable for the goals that I had for a certain lesson, because sometimes it was just a good chunk of just talking about how everyone's adapting and what that needed to be. And then by the end of those conversations, usually at least 4 or 5 or 6 of them were much more willing and to turn on their webcams and sort of not feel like they were the oddball out because everyone had their own challenges. So that was just, like, patience and flexibility on my part. And I think most of them were receptive to that. And then one by one, if it wasn't an actual live webcam, at least they were creating an avatar or showing it a picture or something like that. So at least it was an expression of personality that was, easier for myself and other students to look at, because everyone was dissatisfied with just staring at blank squares, right? But at least if there's an image, if it's not alive, at least that was something. And then things seemed to flow. It was an improvement for the way things flowed after that. So that was one thing. That's it.
Thank you, Chris, Whitaker, and then Charlotte. Hannah, it's also good to see you. We're going to come back to you after.
Yeah, I had a couple of things. One of the things that I think is really important that we've learned in the active learning classrooms is, and this may be an advantage coming this fall, is it's really important to set norms early on, set your expectations. We had that with people sitting at the tables versus getting up to the whiteboards or the smart boards. So I think it will be important for us to set norms pretty early. Once that norm gets installed, to me, it doesn't really matter if it's 100% of the students with their cameras on, as long as, there's 70%, 60%, 80%, and maybe we make it so that, you have, there's a point system or something, and if you get, 8 out of 12 points, you get the grade for participating, so that they can choose a couple of days to not turn on their camera. I think that's important. And then I remember, I think Selma, the themed idea, like a hat day or, And it can be just as simple as somebody drawing a hat on a piece of paper and sticking it to their forehead. Like, it doesn't actually have to be a hat, but some kind of a theme to make it fun. So if you do set the norm and say, no, look, I need you to have your cameras on at least some of the times. If you don't have a camera, please let me know. We'll figure it out. We'll get you some tech. But then making it fun, setting the norm, I think is important. The second thing I wanted to make, the point that I wanted to make occurred when I can't remember who, maybe Vincent, someone mentioned this idea of having students present their work, their pre-class work on the screen. And one of the difficulties I think with this time is that when we ask students to do a task like, do these problems before you come to class, sometimes they'll spend an hour doing something we expected them to do 10 minutes on. And so something we've been doing with the research that I participate in with Saltese is we've been doing these error detection tasks. And I was wondering, because it would be boring to sort of get everybody to say, for example, I teach physics, so get students to submit a pre-class problem solution that they've done on paper, and then go through 2 or 3 of them just to sort of identify trends and things that are working. But sometimes it might be really fun to say, okay, I want you to submit a solution to a problem with an error in it. Embed an error, make a mistake somewhere in it, and we're all going to have to find it. Sort of to flip things on, because otherwise they're going to spend so much time trying to make everything perfect, and they're going to spend an hour getting making sure their diagrams are nice, and sometimes I don't want that. So it'd be fun to flip it. I was thinking of using that error detection as a pre-class work, as a bit of variety, so that they're not always trying to present something that's really pristine and clean. 2 thoughts.
Thanks a lot. Yes, and I would imagine that creating an intentional error might actually take some of them even more time, possibly, if it were to be done genuinely. All right, Charlotte, then Hannah.
Yeah. Well, I've been a participant a lot in Zoom, but mostly for dance, which is a whole other thing. But one of the things that I've noticed taking a lot of courses online is getting new faces up, not having the same face all the time. And so I think what we're talking about, making them put on their screens or making them, when they speak, come on with their face would be really refreshing. And the other thing I noticed in these other courses was that always go into the breakout rooms with a task or questions for them to answer. And I did that. I do that anyway. I have maybe 6 groups, and I give each one a different question. They go into their breakout room and they have 15 minutes to answer it. Then they come back and we hear the different ones speaking. So those are things that were working well for me, using the breakout rooms. I'm concerned because I have the kind of intermediate level English writers and readers coming in. We call it effective reading and writing, and they aren't strong, and they often have some bit of learning disability, attention disorder kind of thing, and it will be their first semester. They're mostly boys who don't like to read. Sorry, guys, but that's the population. And I'm really worried about how am I going to work with them and not lose them that first, their first semester in the fall. One of the concerns, and I don't know, I mean, I in my regular classes, I have them read at home, then they come in and they do a free write on the reading for 20 minutes. And then then they go into breakout rooms and do different things with it. But I'm wondering if I should just imagine and trust that they would do that free writing at home. It's this question of how much to pile up at home on them and expect them to do it. that's bothering me as well. And the other thing that Daniel brought up, well, two things he brought up earlier today. One was doing body breaks. And he was saying he gets up, every 20, 30 minutes, he puts on some music and everybody can get up and dance or move, which I think is great because I like to dance. But what was the other thing? There was one other thing. Oh yeah, someone asked about using whether the whiteboard could be brought back from the breakout room. And what I understood from Daniel was no, but what they could do is take a photo of it. Someone could shoot it or take a photo of it and then bring it back and put it up on screen share. Is that it? Does anyone know?
Yeah, there is a problem with the content that's in the breakout room. If you as a teacher want to access it, there can be a problem with that. If you go to a breakout room, you don't get to see the stuff that was posted before you come in. That's why I thought what Kathy does with the Google Docs can be good, because Google Docs is a doc that you create, you're the owner of it, and then you give the links to the students. They work on it, you have access to that, so you can look more into that. But in terms of what goes into the chat box and also what goes into the share screen in the breakout rooms, there is some limitation in terms of your access. If it's more about brainstorming and things like that, that's fine. But if it's something that you want to access later on, you might want to plan ahead or maybe look into other options.
No,
Hannah,
it was more that they could bring it back and share it with the whole class, whatever they would.
So yeah, you have to assign someone the responsibility to save that, or make someone as like the coordinator of the breakout room, which is a good idea, by the way. Somebody could take notes on what's going on or something. Yeah.
I believe they can take a screenshot inside the breakout room and then share that coming back. I think that's one workaround solution. It's just a bit more time consuming than some other options, but I think it can work.
Can do that. Okay, good.
One point that I want to point out also is that with screenshots and also you have to keep in mind that images have less accessibility than text. So if you are thinking about accessibility, I would suggest that watch out for using too much images and screenshots and cell phones. Those are very easy. Students are very comfortable with it. But if you are looking at something that's more high stake and you want to come back to it in terms of your learning process, then I would suggest try things that have a text option with them. Then that might be advisable. Hannah?
Hey, hi. So I didn't use Zoom a whole lot. I did use Zoom quite a bit, but I did most of my classes asynchronously. So my synchronous sessions, I had the students do a pre-class little assignment. I read it. I brought up their questions. And they all participated, at least the ones who were there, through chat very well, but no one had their videos on. And it was largely because I was recording and they didn't want to be recorded. So they didn't want to talk. They didn't want their videos up. And I was wondering if people had anything to say about that, because I feel that I want to record for the students who can't be there. But it would be nice to see people's faces. I don't know if anyone else had that concern.
Thank you, Vince, and then Chris.
Yeah, just a couple of comments on Raisa. You mentioned something with the background settings. Amazon sells something called a green screen, and they cost around $10 to $15. I mean, we can't ask the students to purchase one of these green screens. Then you could change the image. It's better than an emoji, pictures posted on your forehead, whatever, to identify these students, because they're all really shy. And then we have the problem with the computers and the bandwidth. Some of these students did not want to show their faces because they didn't even have the equipment, webcam or tablets. Right now, the Quebec government, I found out about this 2 days ago, they are willing to invest, I think, close to $15 million in elementary and high school students to be able to purchase the equipment that will be necessary to take these courses online starting in September. I'm not sure if they're available to CEGEP students or university students, but we have to give them the tools to follow us with this online delivery assessment technique. The other thing that I want to mention is something that is rarely used. I think that less people are using this. It's called Teams, Microsoft Teams. I'm giving a lecture to Kathy and Ahmad, you're invited to, on Thursday, on how to use Microsoft Teams with something else called Yammer. And these students can use that as well to forget about the breakout rooms, forget about collaborating on mutual documents. Everything is possible, even video conferencing using Microsoft Teams. So I think that's a very underestimated, very underutilized app. And the other thing that Chris mentioned, I used to insert typo errors in my assignments as well. These were the asynchronous assignments as part of that flipped classroom approach. So in order to make sure that these students were looking at these videos, the video would contain a secret word or a typo. And I would ask them during the synchronous class, what mistake did I make in that asynchronous assignment from last week? And that's an effective approach, Chris. So I agree with what you're suggesting. Put in something that is fun, something that is interesting for the student, besides listening to boring lectures, asynchronous lectures. One of them I had developed a technique for accessing any of the computers at Dawson. It's called VMware Horizon, but it's only accessible for faculty. Then there's another tool called Forti Client. I have some streamed videos on that. You may want to take a look at that because you could recommend those techniques for students that have bandwidth problems. They don't have the right computers, then you have to give them a substitute, an alternative. So this Forti Client is for students, and you should check out the videos that I published on Stream. It allows you to reserve a virtual room in any of the Dawson computer labs. And I think that's useful, an extra tool besides Teams that people could participate in. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. So Teams would be another asynchronous option. And based on my experience, it's if engagement is one of the problems which we saw in one of those word clouds, then asynchronous options can definitely have improved in terms of student engagement. Chris, Roderick, then Carmen.
Okay, a couple of comments. First, Hannah, you were talking about students who didn't want to be recorded. I experienced a similar thing, I think, but I explained it to the students is that the benefit of having a recording of whatever I was lecturing about outweighed their concerns of privacy. And they could turn off their cameras if they wanted to be anonymous. But then the thing was that if there were segments that there was mostly student interaction with, I would actually edit out all of the stuff that had to do with the students before I posted my lecture part of it. So the students would have a space to interact with me live, but they wouldn't be recorded in that sense because it wouldn't be kept. And then Vincent, a couple of things. You mentioned about the money coming from the government. I saw that article too on the press, and it's actually $150 million. But they get, at least in the articles that I've been able to find about it, it hasn't mentioned higher education. It is just grade school and high school, but they haven't mentioned higher education in that. Maybe we can ask the college to pursue that and see if there's any support for that. Also, my wife has been using, because she's been doing teletravail for I don't know how many years now. Her experience is that Teams is very good if you're working in small groups because not only you're doing video, but you can also have real-time sharing of files and documents. But for the large classes that we're dealing with, if you actually want to have the Hollywood Squares, Muppet Show kind of everyone all at once, it doesn't work at all. It doesn't work at all for large groups. So maybe some hybrid thing where you're using that just as a single conduit for you to deliver, and then on the side there's like Google Docs or something happening. And Vince, I had asked in the chat there, what module in Moodle were you using for doing the real-time polling? Because I can see there's about 5 different things that.
It's actually called Poll Survey. Poll Survey Activity, not the resource.
Survey.
I think it's Survey Polls or the other way around.
Okay, because yeah, there's different things. There's a feedback, there's chat, choice, survey.
You're absolutely right. It is feedback. It is
Feedback? Okay.
Yeah, I apologize for that.
No, but just because I want to, because the one I was looking for is I had been doing quizzes, but I was looking for real-time feedback. So
That's the one. Feedback will give you anonymous and non-anonymous results instantaneously.
So thank you. That's all I had to say.
Thank you, Carmen.
Yeah, I was just speaking to Hannah's concern, and I guess Chris kind of gave a similar answer. When I was trying to get my students to participate, but I was recording the lecture, I ended up pausing the recording, encouraging the students to come turn on their cameras and then do, like the exercise problems together, or, we can have our discussions. I would tell them, look, guys, I've stopped recording, so please feel free now to like share your thoughts and work with me on our share screen, and then that got them out. And then I'm like, I would warn them, okay guys, now I'm gonna start recording again, and then the cameras are off. But at least I could get them, on the screen for, good 5-10 minutes.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah, a couple of other things in terms of stuff coming up. We were talking about teams, and I've been working with Liz and the Saltese team to have a series of meetings like this next week, but for people across different institutions and different levels. Because I know, for example, John Abbott was using Teams. And so the idea is with Saltese, we've got this multi-institution community, universities and colleges, and so to get an exchange of what's working and what's not working. So I've proposed, and this is sort of a work in progress, so it might not end up like this, but that on one day, so tentatively June 8th, we would do a something like we're doing right now, where we do an inter-institution group reflection on how things went. Tuesday would be a group think about balancing the online flipped class. So how much do you put outside of class? How much do you make asynchronous, synchronous? Wednesday's session would be about technology platforms and tools. So what different tools are different institutions using? Thursday would be about evaluations and assessments. And then it would be on Friday, there would be avenues for discipline-specific exchanges. So all the historians can get together across institutions, the chemists, the economists, and just talk about stuff within their discipline. So hopefully that will materialize. It's a lot of work to get something like that out, but so that if there may be an opportunity for us to have discussions like this, but across different institutions, and especially for technologies, that'll be great, right? Someone will say, oh, this doesn't work, this does work, this is brilliant, and we'll be able to pivot then. The other thing that I wanted to say was feedback. I think we can, the active learning classrooms were a great lesson in terms of technology, old school technology and new school technology, right? And when we started doing these jigsaw things, we started thinking about having computer software programs that would shift the activity from one computer to another. And then someone just said, why don't you get them to get up and walk around the room? And so, it occurs to me that a good way to get people's feedback is just to say, on a scale of 10 to 1, how are you doing? Are you here, here, here? And just say, okay, is everybody following me 1 to 10? Good. If I see all this, I'm fine. If I see everybody way down here, then not. So I think there are some kind of low tech, very quick options. I don't know who got us at the beginning. I think, Riza, you just sort of asked us to put up our hands if we had trouble. So something like that is a really easy, low tech way of getting people's feedback really quickly. Just 2 thoughts.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So I guess the challenge that some of us may face in some cases is the idea of anonymity versus engagement or response. So sometimes there's a trade-off between those two. Riza, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to also comment on Hannah's remarks about to record or not to record. And I think Carmen also weighed in on that. And I agree. I found engagement was better when I was not recording. And they immediately jumped. They're so sensitive, and rightly so, to the possibility of having their whatever, their engagement monitored or reused. I mean, they're very aware of the problems that that could bring up, right? And abuses that could happen. So I think I'm thinking what I'm going to do is what I might do is pre-record any kind of lecture, short, like 20 minutes max at the beginning. And what I think I'm going to do is, because you know, when you ask people to students to watch something or to watch the lecture beforehand, you're always going to get a percentage of people who don't do it, right? They just haven't done their homework, they haven't watched the lecture. So if my class starts at 2, for example, and I say, okay, at 2, I am, you know, we're all here, hi everybody, welcome. Now take 20 minutes, watch the lecture. They go away and do that. They're more likely to do it in class time. Because that's the time they have already dedicated, you've already got them there. So I think there's a better chance of them like watching your pre-recorded lecture and then coming back right after and engaging in a conversation about it, or going into the breakout rooms and doing some student work together. But that's something I found that I struggled with a bit this semester, asking them to do things, and the majority would, but then there's always a percentage who didn't do the pre-work. So I was thinking if we do that in class time, you know, that might be better. And because we're, you know, some of the classes, not all of them, but we're like a smaller production-based department, so we have sometimes smaller classes. I think building intimacy is really important. And so, you know, I wouldn't record a normal classroom. I wouldn't record a Zoom classroom. I try to keep them as sort of normal as possible. Considering. And yeah, and the other thing is I might split up my groups so that if we have a 3-hour class, because our classes are longer, I might do half of my group in one session. It means I have to repeat the class, but I might do that for certain classes as well. So that's it.
Thank you. So some comments here. One idea is, one thing that I find useful is comparing my own experience. We are all having these meetings, and things that we find challenging, things that we find stressful, for instance, in our own meetings, that can be a good point of reference for us and to infer what the students are going through. So one of the things that I see in the chat box is, for instance, the Slack as a platform to work with. I have very limited experience with it, but based on the quick thing that I looked at, it seems like a very useful place. One concern that I have with all these is about how, to what extent we want to diversify the platforms that we use for students. So the idea is, if everything is in one place, that would be ideal to the extent that's possible. So back in late March, when we just started this, I let the students have a bonus question about expressing their feelings about how they're going, right? And at that point, one of the students wrote a poem for me that I'm going to share with you. I think it kind of speaks to everyone's experience to some extent. So here we go. I wish someone would realize that these online classes are disorganized. There are too many platforms to use. No student can be amused. Every day another doc. When will this crisis ever stop? I just want to return to school and escape this system made by fools. Will I complete my intensive? This issue is unprecedented. Organize staff in a uniform manner. Avoid stress and useless chatter. Mayo, Moodle, Zoom. For distress, is there more room? And he asked me to keep it anonymous, but I got permission to share it. So that's kind of the idea. You know, at the beginning, students were, teachers were somewhat sending things in all sorts of ways. You know, Mayo, Moodle, Leia, whatever. So that could have been an issue there. One thing that a couple of you mentioned, I think Charlotte and Riza brought up, was the idea of work outside class and how to make sure they do that. So I think that's a very valid challenge. one of the things that I tried is having some submission before the class and starting the class with that. So when we had physical classroom, I had handouts that they had to print out and bring it to the class, and we would start the class with that handout. With online, we can have assignments. You know, it could be a little reflective assignment. One thing that I found useful is writing a creative writing. It could be a one-sentence creative writing, and a lot of times I encourage them to make it humorous about the lesson. So for instance, if I give them a lesson on supply and demand, I tell them, okay, write something creative, either a short poem or something, a joke or something funny on that lesson. So it's something very personal. They engage with it and they submit it, and it's a way for me to basically check that they have done it. And it's also a good way to start. So I look at them, and because it's funny, I pick, let's say, 5 or 10 of them. I just post it on the screen, and everybody watches that. And if there is a, let's say, a mistake in there, I can say, guys, watch out. This shows that the student didn't understand because of these things, and it's all anonymous. I found that to be quite useful, both for me and for the students, and the feedback that we get. Kathy, go ahead, and then Chris.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, great ideas, Ahmad. Thank you. I just I wanted to come back. Someone mentioned Slack. Another person, I think Raisa was talking about building community and that sort of thing. I was trying to create also a very intimate, they're a very close-knit group in clinical. They're spending a lot of time. We have a lot of synchronous time when we're in real clinical that we reduced because of the online setting. So I was really concerned about them not being able to communicate with me enough and with each other. And so I set up a WhatsApp chat group, but I had, and it worked fantastically, but I have this little ick about, you know, kind of mixing their private worlds and school spaces. And, you know, I think I was able to set it up with their own email accounts for 3 out of 4, but one, didn't work. I had to have her home phone number. So I think, and it was a very small group, so it was okay. But I think for the fall, when I'm having a bigger classes, I don't know, you know, does anyone else have experience with this? I don't know what the rules are of the college as far as, you know, personal information and that kind of thing. I want to make sure I'm not crossing any lines, but I think we need to find ways of reaching students where they're at. And for me, I found that Mayo is really not a good way to communicate with them. You know, it's okay maybe for making announcements, but in Moodle, same thing, you know, to access a forum on Moodle, it's such a thing. They have to open it. They have to, you know, whereas if they have an app on their phone, they can just, oh, there's a notification. They can see the other students' questions. They can jump in, answer them. It works so well. That I would like to go forward with something like it, or with WhatsApp again. It would just work fantastically. But I just want to know, like, what are thoughts about that, and other teachers, if you've tried things, and what are your experiences?
Chris Whitaker, and then Lee.
I wasn't going to answer that, so why don't we answer Kathy's question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Lee, go ahead.
And you can come back to me after if you want.
Yeah, I was going to respond to that by saying, just in the feedback that I got from my first years, one person did point out the fact that they didn't like that a lot of teachers were sending out Mio messages on a regular basis. And he particularly said it overlapped into his private time. And so they see, which is fair, because you see Moodle as a platform that they can choose to go into when they're ready. Whereas if they're on there getting messages from us, and as the person said, you know, teachers were sending out messages when they thought of something they forgot to say. It's not really fair to the student to infringe on their personal time in that way. So I think that reminded me to be mindful of their personal time. You know, they're there for us in that scheduled period of time. Then they have their time to decide when they do their homework, not for us to be constantly bombarding them with email messages.
Okay. I'd like to speak to that as well. The same thing that Lee just said. I agree with that. I hadn't thought of that with Mayo because I use Mayo, but my assumption is that they would be able to look at that when they had time. So someone correct me if I'm wrong about that. And the students didn't seem to feel they had to respond right away. But Mayo, I know they all check. But something like WhatsApp or Facebook, I'm not comfortable with that because I already feel this is infringing on my life. And I want my students to have connection. I think it's really important. But at the same time, my students all, now know what my house looks like, what my son looks like, what sort of everything is. And, that's fine to a certain extent. But I don't, if I'm not fully comfortable with it, I don't want to extend that to my students. So WhatsApp, Facebook, and it's also too many platforms for me. So I don't really know what to do about the issue of connection versus too much intrusion onto personal life. And I'm also very concerned about that for my first year students coming in next semester, because I know my second and third year students now, this wasn't so bad, but students who I don't know. So I guess I haven't really answered your concern there, but that's, I have sort of the same issue.
Thank you. No, Hannah, that really speaks also to my concerns with Facebook and others. So I think that was well taken. So Chris, then Vince, then Reza.
Chris, me or Chris bearded Chris or unbearded?
No, unbearded Chris.
So I was gonna change topics, or I was gonna ask. I'm really worried about the breadth and the depth for next fall of how much we're going to be able to cover and to what depth, because I think this semester, because it was exceptional, we were able to chop things off. We were able to kind of, not necessarily the R score wasn't going to be counted, so we didn't have to worry about equity and fairness. And I'm so worried about next semester in terms of, the physics students being able to get the deep conceptual things that we know are so hard for them to get without really good discussions and efficient work. I'm really worried about us, assessing the students, because how does a student, how do we distinguish between the student who is, struggling because their personal life, their home life, their internet connection is causing them to compromise their learning, or how much of it is just like I get sort of almost these moments of panic where I think, how in the world are we going to fit this all in? And I don't want to sort of bring the conversation down. I notice a bunch of people going like this, but what are we going to do? How are we going to do that?
Thank you. No, that's a fair point. It's good to think about it. So we're going to look at that. Vincent, you had your hand up for it.
Yeah, I think just to expand on what Chris just said, first of all, there is too much information that's being bombarded onto these students. In the beginning, when I started, it was originally planned for March 23rd, but March 30th came along and I wanted to share so much information with these new students, new platform. I sent them dozens of emails. Big mistake. They were complaining to me saying, why are you bombarding us? I'm trying to have supper here, trying to find food, and I've been forced to read all these emails. So that's where Microsoft Teams came in, and I said, why don't we make this flexible for the students? On-demand chats. Microsoft Teams now pings my phone, and I talk to you about this, Ahmad. So the minute a question is posed, it's asked, no email. They just go on chat and they talk to their Siri phone or whatever Android application they have for recognizing voices. Then it would automatically go through Teams onto my phone. And while I'm eating or doing something else, I get this ping saying a student wants this question answered. And that's the way I solved the problem with bombarding them with too much information. So I applied that KISS principle, and it was really made simple. Too much information at the wrong time, make it simple. And just one last note there, the R score. I have a daughter-in-law that teaches at Vincent Massey, and she said that somehow the R scores are going to be taken into consideration again. Is that true? Does anyone know that? So it's not, okay. Because that's the reason why I made it simpler. And the students appreciated that because they said, why am I fighting so hard to maintain a good average when it's not going to be taken into consideration if I'm going to college or university? So anyways, the KISS principle works for me. I hope it could work for you using Microsoft Teams. That's
Thank
it.
you, Raisa.
I was going to respond more about tools, but I'm actually more interested in what Chris was saying about depth, because that is my biggest concern as well. You know, we could try a whole bunch of different tools, and I talked to my students about it, and they were also saying, you know, keep it simple, Vince, as you were saying, and use, you know, fewer platforms. For some of my classes, I've been using Facebook for years, but I set it up in a very specific way. I set it up as a private group just for our class. And so I'm not into their personal life. They are not into mine. They do not see my feed. I do not see theirs. So if it's set up properly, it's been good in ways of like just sharing, keeping it like a social media. I use it like a social media. So we share articles, comment on memes, look at interesting things that are coming up, and it's a good way to get engagement going. But I think it was Kathy who was saying you want to go where they are. They're not on Facebook anymore. They hate it. So I'm abandoning Facebook, and that's why I'm going to Slack, because it's just, and I've used Microsoft Teams a lot for work, and it feels very business. It doesn't have that kind of light, fun feeling like Slack does. And Slack is so easy. And of course, you get the notifications, and it's free and the whole thing. So I'm going to try Slack just as a sort of a sideline. But in terms of depth, like how do you teach the real deep stuff? And coming back to that, like how do you get them to, because I think, you know, we've managed pretty well this semester, but coming into a whole new semester, I'm still struggling with how to take it further, you know, to make sure that there's actual learning happening and it's not just sort of this superficial, you know, meet our requirements kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It's kind of like we were just passing the card to say we were there and we did the homework. All right, Francis. Unmute yourself. You're not unmute.
Sorry. Yeah, the challenge of how to cover it too. I agree with the idea that I'm in the English department, and we have the largest department with 80 plus teachers, and we have freedom with our content and autonomy as teachers as long as we, you know, get through the competencies. And I don't know how this is going to be with other departments, but we're going to have to really probably establish some sort of common practices within our department, because when we're not meeting regularly with interdepartment or within our department with workshops and stuff like that, suddenly I know I've had my students complaining to me when they're in the same program, how teachers have very different expectations depending on the way teachers do things differently with technical competencies and what's going on. So I don't know, as far as the depth and what am I trying to say here? As to how I'm going to teach what I want to teach, it will have to be adjusted and hopefully not scaled back nearly as much as it has been to finish this semester. But there's going to be has to be some sort of uniformity, I would imagine, for students, because teachers approach online learning in such vastly different ways. Does that make sense? And I mean, we're all here because we're motivated and we're sharing ideas and we're getting into stuff. But then, you know, I don't know what it's going to be like for the other student who takes the same English 101 that I'm teaching, and it's being taught in a completely different way, where maybe all they're doing is just listening to a recording for 4 hours every week and submitting writing assignments, and that's it. You know, and I don't know, it's just an observation and something that's going to have to be, that may not be for our communities, that might be for, you know, individual departments to deal with, but maybe people who are in large departments and have individual freedom and not necessarily fixed content that they have to get through, but are people speaking to their colleagues within their department and trying to figure out ways to bring consistency to their students to achieve the expectations and the competencies that you need to do. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes, that's a very valid concern. Robin, you had a comment on that?
Well, I think too, for some of the programs where like the learning activities have to be in person. I mean, we like Kathy, we took clinical online this semester. And so, I mean, we're looking at, you know, working with a group of second-year students who've actually never done a head-to-toe assessment before. And we're going to have first-year students who are coming in who probably aren't going to have access to clinical, because clinical is going to be unbelievably unpredictable this semester. As soon as there's, like if we're on a unit, as soon as there's a case of COVID, the unit, we're going to be kicked off the unit. And so we're going to have to adapt to a changing environment. But like I'm looking at first semester students who normally one of the big things that they learn how to do is how to talk to people, how to interview people. Well, if we can't even get them into any kind of clinical area so that they can talk to people, like how do you create nurses without giving them access to people and to, you know, and to people who are in hospital? So I know that's, and then I guess the other big thing that we're having to struggle with is if we have the unit today and tomorrow we don't, like how do you change what it is that you're doing that quickly? So like Chris, I'm like thinking, how am I going to teach my students what they're supposed to be learning when from 1 hour to the next, I'm not going to be able to predict what kind of classroom I'm going to have. I don't know.
Thank you. The issue of technical programs and performance related activities is, I've been thinking about it. For me, teaching theory is already challenging enough, let alone like I really don't see any clear solution to those. I don't know if it's even possible to have online teaching for certain competencies. Even if it were to be possible, it would require a lot more creativity. There's one thing I want to share with you. It speaks to what Chris Whitaker said before. The idea of having a consistent pattern that can make a lot of difference. And that is something that comes in the first week of the class. So as we're planning ahead for fall, please take this into account that the first week is probably the most important week of you. That's where you have to really set the precedence. So for instance, when are the assignments due? How are they posted? How are the communications gonna go? So you set that in the first day or the first week, and keep it consistent, keep a pattern. If there's a pattern, keep in mind that they're taking like 7, 8 courses or something. It's very hard for them to remember everything. But if you have a pattern that, okay, every Tuesday, this is what we're doing. Every Sunday, there's an assignment on Moodle or something. If there's a consistent pattern and you stick to it, it can help them a lot to keep up with the activities. And because we have the summer, we can plan ahead so that we don't have to modify it so much. In terms of depth, I think there can still be depth in teaching. Actually, the way I see online teaching is that it's actually an opportunity to make teaching more interactive because it's more independent. So I don't think the problem is so much depth. I think the problem is having them being self-motivated, self-directed learners. If they have I mean, I took online classes. It was actually in English, which I was interested. I took a course on Othello, and also in some other course. And because I was interested, I did the work and I learned. There was forums, and it was designed in a way that I could learn. But the idea is, how can we design the course in a way that they take responsibility for their own learning and they can do the activity. Lee? You're muted, sorry.
Just to advise people to have backup plans, because for all of our plans that we're going to unroll on day one, when Omnivox is down the next week, you meet them, which happened to me so often. It was crazy. Always Tuesday afternoon. I don't know what. So yes, and also to say, this is what we'll do when things go awry. You know, we will always meet back here, or there will be information posted on. I found Moodle was the saving grace in the end.
Thank you, Charlotte.
I don't know if this would work in the sciences, but I find what works really well is giving something a little autobiographical edge so that they can really relate it back to their life. I had to get rid of my oral assignment in my creativity course. So I had them do an autobiography of play. It was really interesting. The idea that play, your ability to play affects your creativity later on in life and how you played as a child. And then they had to write up a project, a creativity project that they did for the class, taking it through particular stages and made a book about it. And it was amazing because they started drawing on their autobiography of play to write the final essay. And it was so much more alive somehow. So I also do a lot of have them do a lot of reflective writing, and then bring that reflective writing into their breakout rooms and share it. And in English anyway, it seems to really work because they have their own private thinking space in their journal where they can do it, and then they can go into a small group that isn't too threatening and discuss it, and then somebody reports back to the whole class. So anyway, that has worked well for me.
Thank you, Robin. Is that a hand up? Catherine, go ahead.
Yeah, just thinking about what some of the people have just been saying about, like Chris Whitaker, that you're concerned about teaching them and how am I going to do this? And I don't feel as negative about it. I'm not so much concerned about my content and my course and the ability to deliver it online. It's not as exciting for me and it's not really what I want, but I'm not really worried about it. But one of the ways I've been thinking about this in the last week or so, and it borrows off of Jeff Gattel, I'm sorry his last name, in one of your English colleagues. But Jeff, a couple of years ago, was showing me how he worked out this whole thing with like working backwards with learning outcomes, really thinking very clearly about, well, what do I want? And for me, that was a big revelation because I was always approaching it at first, working my course syllabus, and then, oh, if it happens to fall in the competencies, well, that was sort of good. But what I've been thinking now, next year, what do I want them to learn, both in terms of content, pure descriptive stuff, what I want them to learn in terms of the analysis, the competencies, functional stuff, proper MLA, etc. And I've been working backwards thinking about that. And it's forcing me to assess whether or not the activities that I've had or the type of lectures, 60 minutes worth, even if it's in an active learning setting, do those all fit on an online format to reach those learning outcomes? And then I'm just sort of going back thinking, yes, this works. Maybe I break my lecture down into 10-minute recorded audios, taking into consideration what I know about online, that you don't want to shove 75 minutes of lecturing. So I'm making tweaks in that area. Or I'm thinking, well, this activity, do I want to do it asynchronously as a homework? Because I don't want to give everybody total Zoom fatigue with 7 classes. So I think I'm getting to the feeling that I can impart the material and the skill set that I want them to learn, but it's just making me go step by step, analyzing what I've been doing, what needs to be changed, tweaked, adjusted, to get the outcome. So I think all this to say is I'm starting from the outcome first, working backwards, and it's sort of reassuring me that I can make modest tweaks. I'm not reinventing the wheel necessarily for online versus in class. So I'm not totally discouraged, and I don't think we should feel discouraged. I think there's a lot of what we do can be adjusted for a full semester. But I love the ideas what people have been saying about set the patterns, set the norms right away from the beginning. And I don't remember who just said that about the consistency. Ahmed, yourself, I think it was. But that's really important. I like that idea of trying to think about, will they do 1 reading and 1 quiz per week before we go into the classroom? Will I have them do, what will I have them do for every Thursday versus every Tuesday? Is there some way I can do that so that they don't feel overwhelmed by everybody inundating them with different things at different times? So a lot to think about. So.
Thank you. Vincent, you had your hand up. I don't know if you still want to say something.
Just one last thing. I think time is nearly up.
Okay.
A consistent pattern is what I would like to adopt right across the college. I'm going to, first thing after this meeting, I'm going to send an email to my chair and try to have something that is recognizable, like consistently for every teacher in my department, probably for every teacher in every department. And I think we have to give them more incentive to want to come to these online classes. So I have to mention one last thing also. I created this band, this Dawson Blues Band, as an incentive to inject something that's happy into these students' lives. And I have 3 participants from nursing, Arlene, Fiona. These people just want to participate in this band just to give something back to the students, because they are sad, really sad students. They don't want to be on these platforms. They don't want to come to class. So I think there has to be some sort of motivational incentive for these students so that we could develop something consistent as a pattern of delivery.
Thank you, Vincent. Charlotte, we still have time. You go ahead.
To just follow up on what Catherine said, I think sometimes I think about, oh, this platform can do that and I should learn that. But to start with, what do I want them to learn, or what do I do in my courses anyway? And then what platform will work, will support it? Because it's really easy to work the other way and think, oh, I've got to learn everything over here on Zoom or everything over here on Teams, or, you know, and maybe that isn't necessary. So yeah, that's it.
I want to talk to this quote which I shared it in the chat box. I was just reading the quote. Pedagogy is the driver, technology is the accelerator. So speaking to what Charlotte was saying, is this idea that decide what we want to teach them, what they are supposed to learn, and then see based on the resources that we have, based on the technology that we have, how we can deliver that. So setting that as a priority can be a way to go and not feeling entangled by our limitations. One other thing that I want to share is there's this idea of unpredictability which came up, and probably in some clinical courses it's even more unpredictable. I find that a good reminder because our life is always unpredictable. Now we kind of get used to, so a lot of times a lot of the comments that we get in these meetings, I feel like a lot of them are first world problems, really. Like we are complaining about things that we can have problem with, and a lot of people don't have problem with them because they cannot have that kind of problems. I mean, the fact that we can communicate, now we have a problem that I can't see the student faces on the screen. But face it, I mean, this itself is you need to be at the level that can be your problem, right? So I mean, you could frame the same thing as an advantage or a privilege, as opposed to necessarily being a problem. Yeah, that's not Chris Roddick. That's not my quote. I don't know whose quote it is, but it's quite famous.
I'm gonna attribute it to you though. Take the praise.
Okay, fine, sure, no problem. All right, any others? We are almost running out of time. Any final comments? Anything that anybody wants to add? Yes, Reza.
Just briefly, sorry I didn't put up my hand formally. Is anybody is there any, like, I know there are lists. I think Saltese has quite a good extensive list on different tools and what they can do, but I think we were trying to compile a listing of different types of platforms and what they do, and just tech tools that, you know, I don't know if anybody is keeping track of that, maybe the doc or somebody else, but that might be good to share as well. If we can.
What are you talking about, the pedagogical tools?
Yeah.
I think the only thing that I would know of is if you go on stream, there's a playlist that the OAD has. The playlist includes a lot of these sessions like this and more things that are hands-on. So for instance, how to make H5P video content, how to make this, how to make that. So those things are posted on that stream playlist, and there are other playlists also on the stream. So that would be one resource that I don't know of any other systematic way of keeping track.
Raisa, you may want to consider something like Google Meet. Concordia students are using that more often than Microsoft Teams or Zoom. They're Google Meeting, and apparently it's free for now up until September 30th. Maybe that's another platform we should consider as well.
What, the whole Google Suite?
Pardon me?
The Google Suite, you mean?
Google Meet.
Yeah, no, I've seen they've been pushing it because now, of course, Zoom is their competitor, right? So they've been pushing that. But, you know, I agree with all of you. It doesn't matter that much what platforms, you know, we all decide whatever works best for us, wherever our comfort levels are. But I do think there is some, you know, it's important, at least across our disciplines, to come to some sort of agreements with that. So we're not bombarding students with so many different tools and platforms. I think we do need to keep that in mind. So.
All right, so thanks to all of you for excellent thoughts. It was a great session. We'll manage to see how we can share this video, especially for those who weren't here, but also for ourselves, and probably through stream. All right, have a great afternoon.